Thank you so much for having me here today in your beautiful, warm, sacred space. I so appreciate being asked to speak to you today. My name is Zahabia Ahmed Usmani, and as was mentioned, I am actually, I don't work for LIDA, I'm board chair for LIDA, and I'm program coordinator for Kaufman Interfaith Institute. I hope in some small way my story today will be somewhat unique to West Michigan and possibly allow us to grapple with the question of how we take the reality of diversity and turn it into pluralism. What might that journey look like, and what part do we play? In the words of Martin Luther King Jr., it is a mistake to think the pendulum of history swings of its own accord. The reality is, people push it. So here's a little bit about my story. My father immigrated from Pakistan in the 1970s when America was short on scientists. He married my mother, sight unseen, totally arranged marriage, went back to Pakistan, and the next day got married to her and brought her back to America. In America, they studied to become certified in their field and found out they were expecting me. They worried about how they would take care of a new baby with no social support network and no secure income, and without having completed their certification. So they made the decision to have me in Pakistan. My mother delivered me in Karachi, Pakistan, and left me with a grandmother, aunt, and uncle for 2 years until when she brought me back to America. And that was actually the first time my father met me. I went to elementary school in Houston, Texas, and this was the first time I viscerally realized race mattered. The memories are snapshots of moments more than an event I can point to. They are nuanced, like the looks the teacher gave me, the way she expected me not to know the answers to the math flashcards, and her dismissiveness instead of compliments when I did. The way she never asked me or the Latino kids to lead the line, the annoyed tone with which she asked me which ice cream I was ordering with my quarter that day, or who she preferred and how they were always not like me. I didn't know what those things meant as a child, but if I think back to when I just knew inside of me that my brown skin was less than my white peers, it was in the classroom of a teacher whose name I don't remember but can picture vividly in my mind. Tall, slim, with big Texas hair and Dallas Cowboys paraphernalia everywhere in the classroom. If you would, for a moment, reflect on when you first realized race mattered. Were you a young child as I was? If not, why did you come to realize the importance of race when you did? What feelings do you experience as you think of those moments? Was privilege a factor in your memory? So thankfully, in the middle of fifth grade, my fifth grade year, we moved to Southern California. See, I'm happy. Of course, you all know Southern California is full of diversity. It's the most diversity I'd ever experienced, ethnically, religiously, culturally, socioeconomically, linguistically, gender identity, sexuality-wise, politically, socially, you name it. I happened to go to a local middle school where neighborhood kids talked about their dads buying their mom Jaguars for their birthday. This felt very unreal to me. Fortunately, I transferred to an inner city high school in Riverside, California for the IB program, and know that that experience shaped who I am today. My school was truly unique in many ways. We practiced inclusion. We were diverse and odd. As an example, the band-nominated girl for the homecoming court always won because the band and color guard were such a huge voting bloc. Furthermore, no one would be surprised or care if her boyfriend happened to be affiliated with the gang. As a high schooler, I was president of the International Club, secretary of Student Council, a member of the Chicano Student Union, a member of the Black Student Union. Clearly, I am not Chicana or Black, although I can pass for Chicana, I'm sure. I was accepted as an ally there, and more importantly, the labels didn't define everything in our little society, like they seem to, and most often in the real world. There were definite groups, like I said, the band kids, the jocks, the cheerleaders, the student government leaders, the IB kids, and everyone was academically tracked, unfortunately. Each of these groups interacted, they were valued, and they valued each other's identities, and they didn't let labels restrict them. However, for my parents, diversity in California felt more like the definition from our reading. They felt encroached upon at work by Filipino immigrants who were quickly getting more and more friends into the medical labs where they worked. It felt to my father in particular like he was being pushed out. This fear is what he and my mother would talk about when he came home after having worked 2 shifts at different hospitals at 11:30 at night and woke her up to share the feelings of the perceived threats to the livelihood that he foresaw. It wasn't just at work. At home, my parents struggled to hold on to their Pakistani traditions from the mid-1900s as they raised my brother and I. We often felt torn between 2 cultures, never knowing which way of doing things was correct. At the time, we truly felt like steps towards our American identity felt to our parents like our Pakistani identity was being chipped away. It took a long time for me to understand that I could be Pakistani American, that I didn't have to choose, and that I was a unique combination of both cultures, and America was lucky for it. So why was my experience with diversity in high school so different than my father's at work? Did I just have less at stake? One thing my experiences set me up for was thinking that everyone would love me for me. How amazing and unheard of is that? Unfortunately, it was in college and now as a mother in West Michigan community that I have been awakened to how cliques work. I'm sure each of you sitting here today knows what I'm talking about when I say West Michigan isn't the most welcoming place for anyone from the outside. So at 23, I got married to my husband and moved to Michigan. A few years later, we settled in the Holland, Zeeland area. We had our first child, a daughter, who I wanted to be authentically herself from the moment she was born. And I knew she would be raised as a Muslim child in a very conservative Christian community and wondered, how is she going to be accepted for who she is? I seriously thought about homeschooling her. And I thought that was the only option. And thankfully, I was advised by family and a few trusted friends to check out some local preschools. At a neighbor's suggestion, my husband and I went to check out a local Christian school where we were instantly surrounded by Bible verses. My nature is to give everyone a chance, and I asked the teacher showing us around if my daughter, who wasn't a Christian, would be accepted for who she is and allowed to share her traditions with the class. I was immediately told that my daughter would benefit from learning more about Christianity. I literally remember my mouth fell open. At first, I was dumbfounded, and then I was angry. Angry that this woman from the dominant culture was so insensitive and expected yet again that we as the minority should bend to her preference. And angry that I would struggle to teach my daughter her faith in a community dominated by other traditions, and that she had no recognition of the privilege that entailed. For some reason, I continued to hunt for preschools and found a small Montessori in Zeeland run by Christian women and had a completely different experience. Although not exclusively a Christian school, they did practice a Christian approach to when they talked about topics. And they addressed certain things from a faith lens. But they said that my daughter would be allowed to be herself, share her traditions with the class as well. And as Christians, they turned out that they truly respected who we were and our beliefs. They honored our beliefs and us as people in many ways, even more so than some of the public school experiences we have had. They too were practicing inclusion and pluralism. Around the time we found out at our preschool in the community, our community was shook by a hate crime, and the N-word was written across the driveway of a Black family in Holland. At a community picnic response to this heinous act, I met Gail Harrison, the then executive director for LEDA, the Lakeshore Ethnic Diversity Alliance. I took an Institute for Healing Racism and then was asked to serve on the board. Now, I finally had a tribe of folks I knew believed in diversity, inclusion, and equity the way I did. And more importantly, there was an organization championing the dismantling to the barriers of inclusion to ensure that people of all ethnic backgrounds had equal access and opportunity and were able to fully participate in the life of the community. Volunteering as a board member has allowed me to have an impact in a small way with everything LEDA touches. One of the newest initiatives that grew out of the last election are the LEDA Allies Committees. These social justice committees range from immigration, environmental justice, women's rights, LGBTQ+, and interfaith. Through the Interfaith Allies Subcommittee, we have had panels like the Know Your Muslim Neighbor panel and the Know Your None of the Above Neighbors. And the next one is to get to know your Hindu neighbors on April 25th at Holland East High School at 7 p.m. We've also had interfaith dinners, and we have another one coming up on March 13th at the Arts Council. These dinners foster fellowship and facilitate dialogue among people of various beliefs. This work has led me to my current role as program coordinator for Kaufman Interfaith Institute. The Kaufman family initiated their interfaith work in the Muskegon area in 1989, where they resided at the time, and set up the institute at GVSU in the summer of 2007. With the Kaufmans leaving the Lakeshore and the institute moving to Grand Rapids, the organized events that were started here have decreased. So part of my role as a community organizer is to help build up the interfaith community to the pluralistic society where traditions are valued. One of the ways that Kaufman is doing this in Grand Rapids is by launching 2018 as the Year of Interfaith Friendship. Almost a dozen affinity groups have started to help people form meaningful relationships with people from different traditions and backgrounds than their own. Through these affinity groups, we hope to influence attitudes, build relationships, and increase appreciative knowledge in our community. In interfaith work, attitudes, relationships, and knowledge form what Eboo Patel calls the interfaith triangle. Eboo Patel uses this to explain the correlation between these three factors with each other. Relationships actually happen to have the largest impact on attitudes, and even more so than appreciative knowledge. So Putnam and Campbell are other researchers, and they've done a lot of research in this area. And their book, American Grace, explained the importance of one interfaith friendship in what they call My Pal Al, the My Pal Al principle. Putnam and Campbell found strong statistical evidence that attitudes towards an entire religious group change with one meaningful relationship with a person from that group. And this relationship can often happen through a shared common activity. So this is very much in line with what Kaufman is doing in our affinity groups. Furthermore, Putnam and Campbell also found that there's also a generalizing effect. So if you make a friend with somebody who, say, is a nun, then you are more likely to have a better understanding of somebody who's, say, a Hindu or a Buddhist, or just by knowing someone of a different tradition authentically. As I am present with you here today, I want to share a story of how my work at Kaufman has deeply impacted my life on a personal level. I met a friend named Patricia who sits with you among you today and holds a piece of my heart. I met Patricia when after having the Know Your Muslim Neighbor panel. She was the first NONE nun that I had really gotten to know. So she said she was a nun and loved how authentically we honored our Muslim neighbors and wanted to work with us to do more. Little did I know that Patricia went to Princeton Theological Seminary and has had a faith journey unlike anyone else I know. She's the first nun I have developed a strong friendship with over the course of our interfaith work together. As life is constantly unpredictable, I've recently gone through some difficult times with an ailing father. Through my conversations with Patricia, I've learned the importance of breath. This is just one of her practices that she's taught me. Mindfulness and breathing allowed me to be more intentional, which is a really important concept in Islam. This one simple example of how my faith grew directly because of my relationship with Patricia is a beautiful example of the interfaith triangle, but also of pluralism realized. Religious pluralism is defined as the peaceful coexistence of multiple religions in a community on a surface level. But Diana Eck, who runs the pluralism, who runs the Pluralism Project, defines it as the energetic engagement of diversity. Still pretty good, that's good. But if you think to the definition we read in our reading, the last part of it, that is, especially the last part of it, shows us the pluralism we are striving for. Pluralism, therefore, implies disagreement and dissension within the community, but it also implies a community within which there must be agreement or consensus. There is no small political problem here. If society is to be at all a rational process, some of these principles must motivate the general participation of all religious groups despite their dissensions in the oneness of the community. On the other hand, these common principles must not hinder the maintenance of each group of its own identity. Although many people think pluralism is a philosophy by which you must give up your core beliefs to compromise and get along with others, true pluralism, according to this definition, allows each of us to be wholly and authentically us while still honoring and accepting the other. In this approach, there is still room for divine envy, as I am so thankful to Patricia for teaching me the importance of practicing breath to recenter myself, thus allowing me to be more intentional as a Muslim. My belief in the oneness of Allah has not lessened by my relationship with Patricia. In actuality, the way I can live my faith is enhanced by this relationship. In Islam, the Holy Quran, as well as examples of the prophets, serve as a guide to the way we as Muslims should live our lives. In the Quran, in chapter 49, verse 13, it says, "O humankind, God has created you from male and female and made you into diverse nations and tribes so that you may come to know each other. Verily, the most honored of you in the sight of God is he who is most righteous." In this verse, we can see the acknowledgement of tribes within our society. And while they exist and they're important in their existence, it is sacred work to find common ground and understanding. As an example of interfaith cooperation, Prophet Muhammad, in one of his first acts when he immigrated to Medina, created the Constitution of Medina. This covenant brought together various religious groups and tribes in an alliance of goodwill and common defense. It also put into practice a philosophy of Ubuntu, where, for example, it is incumbent upon a Muslim to help rebuild a downtrodden church because the success of each group made the whole better. Also, in chapter 11, verse 188, the Quran says, "If thy Lord had so willed, he would have made mankind one people, but they will not cease to be diverse." To Muslims, the Quran is affirming the ever-expanding diversity and we are experiencing in our world today. As your series is entitled, "We Are All Here," according to Islamic beliefs, this diversity is real, it is intentional, and it isn't going away. The question remains, as tribalism grows in our political climate and extremes are dominating the conversation, what will we do to promote real pluralism? We must teach others that finding middle ground doesn't always mean giving up something to gain something else. We must capitalize on the opportunity to know one another and the beauty and all the beauty and benefit it will bring. We must create a space for dialogue, sharing ideas, and education. And we must take the risk of building relationships across difference. Pluralism is a necessity for today and tomorrow. Please join me in pushing the pendulum of history a little further in this place as we make West Michigan a place where all people are respected and celebrated in a community of love and understanding. Thank you.